Once upon a time, in a humble cabin in the middle in the forest, there lived two children named Hansel and Gretel. One day, in days of famine, the mother decides to get rid of them. So she sent she sent the kids to wander off into the woods, where the children try to find a way to get back home. They try to put a trail. They try with a trail of crumbs, but unfortunately the crumbs were eaten by the animals. Now lost in the forest, and dying of hunger, they stumble across a big giant house of candy and sweets, and there they began to gobble the house. Until then, they were greeted by an old lady who kindly takes them under the roof. Little did they know that this little old lady is actually a witch who is trying to fattening up the kids so they can eat them. So yeah, what I told you basically is the basic story of the famous fairy tale Hansel and Gretel. So, but what I told you is basically the gist of what's the Hansel and Gretel story. Okay, you might be thinking, hey, what are you doing? Are you here reviewing fairy tales? Not exactly. The movie I saw is none other than the latest adaptation of Hansel and Gretel. Sorry, I didn't mean to say the title incorrectly. I meant that the movie that I just saw is actually called Gretel and Hansel. Clever, huh? I had a little bit of kind of like raising of my eyebrows of why they decided to call the title, Gretel and Hansel. But you know what? I'm not gonna go into these political things that every single thing people on the internet go, because this movie kind of doesn't earn that. And good, because I don't want to go into that. So basically, now I can talk to you about about Gretel and Hansel, because the trailer interested me. I saw the kind of movie that was gonna be, and I thought, hey, you know what? Giving kind of like a more scarier, darker approach to one of the most memorable fairy tales of all time seems like a nice deal. Although they did that in the past, sometimes they get a little bit too actiony, or they always want to twist it in a way or another. So, but in this one, they wanted to make it kind of like the style of those dark, edgier horror movies, and kind of reminiscent to The Witch, which is one of my favorite scary movies of all time. And also they got a little bit like Midsummer, and which was okay, I'll say. So now we got this. So I was fairly interested, and I decided that, well, it's time for, this is technically a good idea to end off the January, the dumpster fire of horror movies. How was this movie? Here's the thing. This movie is not gonna be for everyone. Not just because it's a horror movie, but it has some cinematographic techniques that people might not like it, and they just will say that, you know what, this is so boring, let's get out of here. But in my eyes, I'll say that this is probably one of the most interesting films I have seen this year. I mean, compared to what I saw, I would say that Gretel and Hansel is probably the best January film I've seen this year. And so we could say that we did end up well this year with a better movie compared to the other ones that we just saw. but still, that's not saying much. The movie has some problems, mostly a little bit on the writing department, which a little bit I'll get through. Before I start, I will tell you that if you wanna watch the movie, I'll just say that this movie is really slow paced. Is not gonna be all for everyone. If you are familiar with how The Witch and Midsummer are filmed, if you don't like this kind of movie that it's gonna feel a little bit of a chore, then this movie is not gonna be for you. But I will say again that that the approach of how they decided to tell a very classic fairy tale is indeed interesting. But with that said, it's time for me to talk to you about it. I will say that it's not very hard to tell you the summary of the movie, because at this point I think that everybody knows the story of Hansel and Gretel. I just already told you at the beginning of this review what is it about. But one of the things that this movie does, because of the title Gretel and Hansel, this time they put a little bit more focus on the character of Gretel, as well as they're gonna focus a little bit more on the witchcraft side of the Hansel and Gretel story. So in this case, we got we start out with the narration of a witch, how she was born, and how she has these powers in which she can foresee the future, and all the time when she predicted the future of other people, they always come up with grim death, even by quote unquote killing her father by making him swallow a red molten iron, and he swallows it with like this. And then she gets banished into the forest. She begins to lure children, and then build kind of like a triangular house. So I will tell you that don't expect to see a house full of sweets like these stories. Although I didn't read the really original version of the Grimm fairy tales, but so I don't know if the House of Sweets was made to kidify the story or anything else. And also, instead of having Hansel and Gretel being kind of like the different spectrum of the aging, but they're kind of like the same. This time Gretel is kind of like the teenager, and Hansel is like kind of like the eight-year-old child. And basically, yeah, the story runs usually the same. Basically, kind of like the same. But in this case, for example, Gretel is she decides not to go in any convention because she didn't want, because the convention was kind of like a douchebag, for lack of better words. And the mother is basically insane. She kicks kicks both children out of the house. They settle into kind of like a church to lead them somewhere around the woods. They get lost in the woods, and then they find the house where the old lady lives. Yep, kind of like Hansel and Gretel. Like, the acting for the most part is okay, I'll say. Sometimes I did have a little bit of difficulty understanding, the dialogue of the character, because when they try to act a little bit kind of like somber, and sometimes they kind of lower a little bit their voice, and I guess I like, something like that. But still, they did a decent job. Our main character is Gretel. She's played by Sophia Lillis. She's very well known as John Beverly Marsh from the It Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. And I gotta say that, to be honest, I don't know why, but kind of her short hair kind of mesmerizes me because the, the haircut that she had, it makes her less feminine. And so I thought that she was kind of like a boy in a drag that decided to call itself Gretel. No disrespect, but that was kind of like the thoughts about it. The little Hansel, he's played by this kid called Samuel Leakey, and well, he does a fine job as a kid actor. He's not annoying, but a little bit almost false, like talking like this, kind of like a precious little thing. Kind of like, but I do kind of admire some of the things that they tried to make with the kid, but unfortunately they didn't go through with it. But I will say also that probably the best actor in this movie, or in this case actress, is the one who plays the old lady and the witch. She's played by Alice Critch. There is also kind of like a younger version of her played by Jessica DeGaulle. And honestly, it's very mesmerizing the way she kind of acts, and kind of building to the whole mystery that it involves in it. So it's time for me to talk also a little bit of the plot elements that this movie has. Like I said, this movie, the movie has this cinematographic thing in which it's so atmospheric and so eerie and dreary that you can't help to feel scared, because it has a great atmosphere of dread and grimness. There's a couple of jump scares, but luckily they felt earned. It's one of those movies in which they don't treat you like an idiot, in which saying that boo surprise, just like the Grudge and the Turning did. At least those were well done. And again, the slow pacingness of the movie, it works on its advantage. The movie moves in a really slow pace. And also one of the things that it kind of makes this movie interesting in a storytelling perspective is that this one kind of focused a little bit more on the witchcraft portion, in which now that we have Gretel kind of like being the front and center, the main character, or in this case, sometimes she narrates the story, is that they make her have this kind of like this talent, that hidden talent, that she's also a witch. She starts by having this moment in which she talks to inanimate objects. Although we never see them. It's almost like when you see a person saying, "Hey, this guy is talking to a broom." That's crazy. That's crazy. But still, it little by little it begins to develop, and then of course the old lady, the real witch, she kind of begins to take interest on Gretel, and basically she kind of subtly tries to train her about the art of the witch, and at the same time, of course, she has her eyes on Hansel, because obviously a witch needs to eat. That's the best I could describe. And yeah, there are some subtle moments in which they kind of tell you that she's been doing this for a long time, in which it drags out children in order to kill them and turn them into meals. Oh yeah, this again, these parts come out as being kind of like interesting. I just kind of wish they could build it a little bit more on that and make it a little bit more creepier, because I don't know, in a way it kind of made me feel like it comes from the same universe of The Witch, but unfortunately it didn't. It's the only thing that they adopted is the mood. Apart from the cinematography, I think it is time for me to... No. Well, I already told you that the pacing could be not for everyone, But apart from that, I would say that there are also some things that makes the movie a little bit clunky on the writing side. First of all, the dialogue is a little bit too poetic for many people's taste. It has this kind of little bit of an air of pretentiousness into it that it felt like you're watching kind of like a more Shakespearean type of acting in a movie that is supposed to be horror. It's not exactly horribly bad, considering that I saw a movie with terrible dialogue in the last couple of weeks. So at least this is kind of like an upgrade compared to the other movies. Another thing is that sometimes the movie kind of comes up with some weird moments that we then kind of act like, what the hell was that about? For example, before the children get lost into the woods, they take refuge on a what was it, in a church. They go inside, and then for the movie to give a scare, a dude just pops out of nowhere and like, ah! And then the children to try to make it clear, the guy begins to chase it. But when you look at this guy, he looks like a zombie. So much that later, I think it's the priest. He just comes out and he just shoots him with a bow and arrow. And then he's the one who gives the direction to the kid. And the guy doesn't. And the guy and the quote unquote zombie, they don't appear anymore. They don't even talk about it. But it took me a while for a moment to say, okay, what the hell was that about? Another thing that probably might make people kinda unintentionally laugh is the moment in which the movie tries to become kind of like cleverly scary when Gretel and Hansel they begin to have hunger pains and they begin to question if they have to eat some mushrooms. Pro tip, children: if you see red mushroom with white spots, they're not good to eat. But their desperation made them eat, and also because Gretel say that, hey, I talked with the mushrooms, so they say they're okay to eat, and they eat it, and we get kind of like 30 minutes of of them going into kind of like the editor tried to have some fun with the kid being on shrooms and all that. Yeah, there's also there are the character kind of see visions and silhouettes of witches. That wasn't established too well, and I didn't get that. Also, the movie wanted to give a little bit of an arc with Hansel, in which Hansel during the whole movie he just he wants to be a woodsman, and he just wants to practice how to swing an axe. But unfortunately, this thing is not even complete. We don't know. The axe and the training of him to becoming a woodsman doesn't pay off, and it's barely touched again in the movie. The only thing that the movie find it kind of like important is that whatever Gretel wants to calm Hansel, she just puts her head but kind of like head to head, and she makes this oinky noise like yeah, they kind of make it a little bit like that. Finally, I will say that the ending is pretty much a mixed bag. I appreciate what it wanted to do. I appreciate that, that it wanted to take a not so different route like the original story. It kind of ends the same way, but also not at the same way, and it's kind of depressing, but at the same time it makes you let you wonder some things. It's not a horrible ending. I mean, I have my taste of horrible ending with the turning. Whatever is this an ending or so. And pretty much that's all I have to say about this movie. There's not much I have to say. It's a curiosity of a movie that have a different approach to the original story, and honestly, I would like to see a little bit more of how you could how many times you can take a very memorable fairy tale and give it different directions. And probably I will say that the Grimm fairy tales are the closest thing to horror, considering how the source material was. And boy, this one is kind of middle of the road, and I just ended up liking it for what it is and appreciating it for what it is. So again, if you're curious, check it out. It's just one interesting piece of media that well, it's not might be the original tale that you think of, but you probably you'll get something to talk about.